Welcome back to our video series. In this video series, what we want to do is start looking at the challenges of adding an administrative role to our app. So right now, if anyone logs in, when they log in, they can see all of the other volunteers. They can see their contact information, their birthdays. That might be personal information. So we wouldn't actually want to see that for all volunteers. If I had if I had a volunteer that was just a volunteer, not an administrator, maybe what I want to do is just take them straight to this type of a scene where they can log hours, that they've worked, but they couldn't necessarily see other people's information. Or maybe I could allow them to go to an edit screen where they could edit their profile. But again, I wouldn't show them everyone else's profile. And so that's actually going to be a fairly involved change to our app. If we look at it, if we were looking at a user story, you might say, as an administrative user, I want to ensure non-administrative users can only see their own information. And then we would put some acceptance criteria to that. So when logging in, administrative users are taken to that kind of all volunteer screen. And when logging in, non-admin users are taken to a screen to log their hours. So what that means is if I'm an administrative user, I should be sent to this screen. But if I'm not an administrative user, I should go to this screen. And to set this up, we actually have several steps that we need to take. First, we're going to have to update our database to even support the concept of an administrator role. Then we're going to have to update the create volunteer view and controller so that we can make someone an admin or not. We're also going to have to update the edit volunteer view, right? So if they're an admin, I guess if they're not an admin, they shouldn't be able to make themselves an administrator, right? So we need to be able to turn that capability on and off. And then our login controller needs to route the user back to the appropriate view. And then we're also going to have to update what happens with the log hours view so the back button makes more sense. So right now, if we go to log hours, if I took someone straight to here after they logged in and there's a back button, this should take them somewhere appropriate. But right now, it's going to take them back to here, which is not appropriate. So there's a lot of steps we're going to have to take. I might even break this into a couple different video pieces to break down the things. But let's start with the simple stuff. Let's update the database to support our administrative role. So let's go to our database here. So select star from volunteers. Look at our database today. We have all the information that we're storing about each volunteer. But really, we need one extra field, which is whether or not our volunteer is an administrator. So the way that we can handle that is we're going to alter our table. What we need to do is add a column. I'm going to make it a Boolean, and I'm going to just call it admin. Boolean. Default. So this now added in this column, and by default, all the values would be false. So the only way for someone to become an administrator is if we explicitly make them an administrator. And I'm going to do that with user number 12 because that's the one we've been using a lot. So to do that, I'm going to say update volunteers, set admin equal to true, where volunteer ID is 12. So now, if we look down, this one user is our administrative user, and everyone else is not. Okay, so now we've modified the database to allow to store this information, and we need to update the create volunteer view and the controller and the volunteer class itself to support this administrative role. So actually, I might do this a little out of sequence. I'm going to do number 4 first. I'm going to update the login view controller to route to the appropriate view. So let's do that first, because that's kind of the easiest thing now that we have our database set up correctly. So in here, this is our volunteer table. Whoops, sorry. We want our login view controller. Right, so this is the screen that when we run our app, this comes up. So if we type in a valid user and password, we should be taken into this screen here, if they're an administrator. So let's take a look at how we're doing this today. So today, this is a little bit big. Today what we do is once the user has filled in information and they click the login button, we're going to create a connection to our database. Okay, so we connect it to our database, and what we do is we say select the password and the salt from volunteers, where the volunteer ID equals whatever the user passed in, and we handle that here with our prepared statement. And that makes sense, right? So we're going to basically get back the password and the salt, so we can use the password that the user just gave us to see if we can generate this encrypted password. But we also really need to get back whether or not this is true or false. So what we can do is we'll add one more here, okay? Because we just called it admin. So we're going to add one more column to our response, and let's paste this in here. Volunteer equals, let's say it was user 12 that they had put in. Oops, right, so this is what would be returned from the database when we made a query like this. So most of it's the same, right? We're going to do our connection. We just had to add that one extra field for admin. We're going to get our result set. And then here, we can get our database and our salt. Okay, so that we have, but we also need to grab one more thing, which is going to be the admin. So I'm going to say Boolean admin is false. And down here, I'll say admin equals result set, get Boolean, the field called admin. So this is going to return a true or false to, to this variable. So now we have the user ID, we have their password and their salt, and whether or not they're admin. We create the password, make this a little bit smaller so we can see it. So we're going to take whatever password the user gave us, and then we try to validate it. And right now we say, well, if the password's valid, change scenes to the volunteer table. But now we need to do one extra little check. We're going to say, well, if the password's valid and admin is true, right? So we can just say and admin because it's Boolean, it's going to be true or false. So if that's the case, then we're going to go to the volunteer table, else if if it's a valid user, but not an administrative user, then we're going to say SC change scenes. But this time we're going to have to pass in the volunteer information. So the do that one more time here. Okay, so event we pass in, and then the view name that we want is going to be, we want to go to this log hours view, right? So in here, we're going to say log hours view.fxml. My hinting is it's not hinting well, but I'm pretty sure this is the title for that scene. So we're going to say log hours, and then we need to pass in controller class and the actual volunteer. Okay, so in order to pass in the volunteer, we need to actually create an instance of that volunteer. So we need to create an instance of the volunteer from the database, and we're going to create an instance of the controller class for login. The second one's the easiest one. So we're going to controller class and here what we need to do is create the log hours view controller. Now we've passed in, can create that controller class. So all that's left is to create a new instance of our volunteer. But in order to do that, we're going to actually need to get all of the information from the database about this volunteer. And we have a couple options here on doing that. See, we don't really need to load all that information if we're just going, if it's a generic user, if it's an admin user. We only need it if it's a volunteer. So let's do this. Let's create a method. So I'm going to say volunteer. So I'm just going to extract this into a little method, make this a little easier to follow. And I'm just going to copy, since a lot of this is sort of the same. This down here. And we'll just make sure to close off connection, our prepared statement, and our result set. Actually, just thinking out loud here. Why do all of this when we could just get all this information here? Okay, so maybe what we'll do is rather than getting the password, salt, and admin, we just all those items, because when we create our password, we use these things. The only thing we really need to do in that case, so again, what I did is rather than just picking 3 fields, I said, you know what, let's just return everything. And while we have our result set, okay, while we're parsing that, in here, we can create a volunteer. So let's do volunteer and in here, what we can do is we can say volunteer is new volunteer. And we can pass in all the information that we need about our volunteer, right? So if we look at our volunteer class, we created a few different volunteer constructors. So if we're going to preload one, I'm just thinking here which one we want to use, because this one's going to always create a default image, and this one's going to create an image, create a volunteer. It creates this custom image, and then it's going to copy it. So I don't want to be copying our default image. And those are our 2 possibilities. Just take a quick gander here. When we load a volunteer, yeah, we just handle them that way. Sorry for those watching the video. I'm just thinking this through a little bit here on how we want to do this in a clean way. That's what I did. Okay. So this is basically what we're going to do. My apologies for making this maybe a little longer than it needed to be, but this is how we will set this up. Copy this here and go into our login view controller. And we're probably missing unreported no such algorithm. Okay, I'll add a throws clause for that. There we go. Okay, so what happens now is when the person logs in, we're going to get their password and their salt, but we're also going to create this new kind of temporary volunteer. And then when we come down here, if the passwords match and they're an admin, we can change scenes to this volunteer table view. And if they're not, we've already created our volunteer. We already have them initialized here, and we can pass them into our log hours view controller. So let's give this a try. So the first person we're going to do is we're going to log in as an admin user. And this works. So it brings us to an administrative view. So I'm happy with how that works. The next thing we want to do is we want to log in with a user that's not an admin. So let's try user 11. And they get taken to the log hours view. And we still have to deal with the back button here because I don't think we really want to go back, because even though they're an administrator, now if I hit back, it takes us to the screen that they shouldn't be able to get to. So we're gonna have to deal with that. But that does allow us to log in to the correct scene. And I'm gonna create a new video that talks about getting rid of some of the back buttons and dealing with some of those other items. Okay, sorry there was a little delay in the middle. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.